I love history. Well, I guess I should be more clear. I like reading about history. I have no interest in actually experiencing it. The only exception, of course, is with video games. It's fun to go back and play through games that are nearly twice as old as I am. I find the development of the technology to be fascinating, and I love going back to see the things that I've missed. Which is why back in 2018 when I got my NES Classic, I was so excited to fire up and play the original arcade classic, Donkey Kong. This was one of the most important games of all time, heralded as a classic from the era and marked the start of modern Nintendo. I played for about 30 seconds, and then I was so excited to fire up and play the original Super Mario Bros. Yeah, skipping to the end here, my opinion on this exact version of this game isn't very high. I don't think it's aged very well, but we'll get to that in a second. The history of this game is still pretty cool. It introduced both Mario and Donkey Kong, who along with Pac-Man I'd say are the three most recognizable game icons ever. It set the groundwork for Nintendo to build onto the idea of games involving a man crossing obstacles via jumping to reach a goal, aka the platforming genre, and the infamous court case where, while being sued by Universal over the alleged similarities between Donkey Kong and King Kong, Nintendo was defended by a lawyer named John Kirby who would have his own video game icon named after him as a sign of gratitude. Another well-known bit of trivia is that this game only really came into existence because Nintendo's previous game, Radarscope, which was a Space Invaders clone, flopped and the cabinets were repurposed to run this game instead to save money. Just imagine how different things could have turned out had Radarscope not flopped. It'd be a very different world for sure. None of the big three would likely even exist as console manufacturers. I thought it would be cool to show some gameplay from Radarscope, but unfortunately it hasn't been released on modern platforms, which is really disappointing. Even if it's nothing special as a game, it's still a huge piece of history that isn't accessible today via legal means, and that's really unfortunate. I talk about history with this game because, to be honest, I think it's the only reason people say nice things about it. With a game like Super Mario Bros., it's just as fun today as it was back then. You throw it at the modern gamer and they'll have a good time with it. If you throw Donkey Kong at them, they'll sue for damages. Getting to the actual game, it's a very basic platformer. The first thing you'll notice is Mario is far from the agile and fun to control character he is today. Here he feels very stiff and heavy. He can barely jump in this game, and when I say he's heavy, I mean the force of gravity is pulling on his mass with such a force that his entire body is crushed if he falls more than 2 feet. When you boot up the game, you have 1 and 2 player options, but you alternate taking turns playing, so it's not actual co-op. You can either choose Game A or Game B. Game A is the easier starting difficulty, and Game B is the harder difficulty you go to after completing a round in Game A. There's a little jingle at the title screen and a little jingle when you win, but that's about it for the music here. Instead, you can enjoy the soothing sounds of Mario's footsteps. The pattern of the enemies feels random with the exception of the spring, but after looking into it, the barrels above you can be steered, and the pros use this to their advantage to rack up points. At least it seems to be true in the arcade game. I don't know if the same logic was ported here to the NES game. To assist you in defeating these enemies, Mario can get a hammer that can destroy them for extra points. You can also collect Pauline's umbrella and purse to increase your score too. There's a time limit for reaching the end of the stage, but you're likely to either make it to the top or die before it runs out. I didn't even know there was a timer until I made this video. When you beat stage 3, there's an ending cutscene showing DK fall to his defeat and Mario and Pauline with a little heart by them. But that's all the cutscenes that are in the NES version. The arcade version has a few more, such as DK taking her to the top of the stage at the start of the game. The story of this game is that Donkey Kong has kidnapped Mario's girlfriend Pauline and takes her to the top of a skyscraper. To get her back, you have to commit OSHA violations and traverse a dangerous construction zone by jumping over barrels, avoiding fireballs, collecting purses, and unscrewing bolts to defeat Donkey Kong himself. Once you defeat Donkey Kong, the game restarts at the beginning and you do it again at a harder difficulty. In addition to the iconic barrels that you have to avoid, you also have to avoid piles of concrete on a conveyor belt that are shaped exactly like pies. Except, no you don't actually, because this is the NES version, and the concrete factory as it's called isn't here. An entire level from the arcade game is missing in this version. This is bizarre to me. This is the game that put Nintendo on the map, and they couldn't figure out how to put the whole thing on a single cartridge? Super Mario Bros. Has 32 levels. Ice Climber also had 32 levels. Even Golf has 18 holes. Golf, not even NES Tournament Golf. We're talking just golf. But Donkey Kong can have 4 levels? The 4 levels that were already designed in an arcade game years before the cart was released? I've seen people online say it's not a huge deal and it's almost certainly due to cartridge size limitations. Donkey Kong was a launch title for the Japanese equivalent to the NES, the Famicom, one of 3 to be exact. And it seems the storage sizes only got figured out by the time the other games I mentioned rolled around. People online also mention how that was a normal thing back in the day, so it's no big deal. After all, the Atari 2600 version of Donkey Kong was also missing the cement level. But this doesn't work as an excuse. Donkey Kong on the Atari 2600 is not a good role model. All 4 levels should have been here. And even if they really couldn't do this when they launched the game in Japan in 1983, by the time the NES launched in the US in 1985, they definitely could have included this, as Ice Climber and Mario had already come out by then. But they didn't. They just ported the incomplete Japanese version. This is so lazy, and it's a slap in the face to this game. It's not like the cement level is a ton of fun or anything. It's definitely the least interesting of the 4 arcade levels, but it's the principle. If you really want to play the cement level, you do have options. The arcade version of Donkey Kong was playable in Donkey Kong 64, or you can pay $7.99 to access the arcade version on the Switch through Arcade Archives. You can do that, but I'm definitely not going to. Interestingly, an advanced port of Donkey Kong on the NES called Donkey Kong Original Edition was released on the Wii and 3DS back in the day. It was basically a ROM hack of the incomplete NES game with the cement level added, but with the shops closed down, this isn't accessible anymore. As you could tell though, I'm not a fan of this game. Mario feels bad to control, the game isn't even complete, and there's just much better options out there. There were follow-ups to this game, Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong 3, but 3 doesn't really follow this game's formula at all, it's kind of its own thing, and Donkey Kong Jr. sort of does, but it still feels like its own thing too. If I had to pick a game that feels the most like a Donkey Kong sequel, I would have to pick the beloved game Donkey Kong. Whereas the NES game is the arcade game but missing a level, the Game Boy version is the arcade game but if it kept going and got a lot more in depth. I've only played a bit of this game, but I love what I played and I have every intention of going back and reviewing it sometime in the future. It contains all the levels from the arcade game, so if you really want to play Donkey Kong, get this version. It basically comes with a whole other game. And this game set the groundwork for the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, which I would argue is the true spiritual successor to this game rather than the Donkey Kong Country or even the Donkey Konga series. In summary, Donkey Kong is an important milestone in gaming, but one that is best enjoyed as a historic timepiece rather than a game in its own right. However, it laid the framework for some of the greatest games of all time, so its contribution shouldn't go unnoticed. I recommend trying it out if you have access to it on the NES Classic or Switch Online just to experience it, but I wouldn't pay anything for it. You'll probably play through one round and then move on to something else. And with that, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.